Video games have been played and enjoyed for generations at this point. Their influence on modern culture is hard to measure. You can just look at the fact that GTA 5 is the largest grossing entertainment product in history, surpassing any form of film or music to see this is true. Hundreds of millions are being spent creating AAA games in what is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. Now this all sounds like the gaming industry is at its highest point. Surely it's never been better. We are at the pinnacle, surely. There are more gamers than ever before. More money is spent on buying and creating games than ever before. There are more companies than ever before. There have never been as many eyes on the medium as there are today. And essentially, you must be some sort of sad, incel loser if you think that there might be some issues within this industry. So why does it seem like everything is going to hell for this industry? As you can probably deduct from the title of this video, I am increasingly of the opinion that in fact, cultural Marxism and its consequences have almost completely destroyed gaming. To make sure I'm not misunderstood on this, I will define these elements specifically as the so-called progressive, woke agendas such as feminism, sexual liberation, LGBTQ, transgenderism, anti-racism, so-called anti-fascism, the abolition of whiteness, political correctness, multiculturalism, gender politics, abolishing the patriarchy, critical theory, and so on and so forth, which all fall under the general umbrella. These ideologies have slowly infected Western culture and by extension the gaming industry at all levels over several decades, to the point now where you can hereby consider this video a late stage cancer diagnosis of the entire gaming medium. All of these ideologies and movements have come into being as a result of the theoretical application of Marxist principles through cultural and societal terms throughout the West over roughly the last 80 years, with the intended and successful goal of cultural subversion and revolution. This was done because various Marxists and institutions like the Frankfurt School and those like it in Europe and America believed that the working classes were just too comfortable. You know, they were too wealthy, too tied to their families and to their culture, to their nation and their traditions, too content or simply too ignorant to ever entertain these Marxist economic theories and the struggle to overthrow capitalism. Therefore, back then it was decided to put economics on the back burner and focus on these other elements of Western society, which needed to be dismantled in order to deracinate and demoralize these various peoples in order to bring about more revolutionary conditions. These are simply the facts of the situation. An example of some of these Marxist principles applied in cultural and social terms would be the idea that traditional Western cultural and social norms themselves are a main cause of perceived oppression in the modern world, or the conception of critical theory, which is a pseudo-intellectual, ideological deconstruction of Western literature, culture, society, life, biology, and even the notion of logic itself through the limited Marxian worldview of everything, literally everything, being a manifestation of the oppressor and the oppressed, which plays out through various class, social, sexual, and racial hierarchies. Essentially, their conclusion is that white, heterosexual men are the sole oppressors of everybody else, which is an extremely narrow-minded, logically flawed, and deceitful way of making conclusions about Western civilization. Another example would be the belief that Western culture and its institutions have to be dismantled and destroyed in order for the utopian revolution over capitalism to occur. which, yes, the radical communist types absolutely believe to be true. This has led to the long, slow march infiltration of the gaming industry among many others, which was achieved by an ideological occupation and subversion of the education system, alongside many corporate and government institutions throughout the West, which began 50 to 60 years ago. Now, this may sound insane to the uninitiated or to the more normie audience, but yes, this was genuinely allowed to happen as a result of the collective guilt and weakness of the post-World War II collective Western psyche and the damage inflicted on it, particularly amongst the intelligentsia and the middle-class bourgeoisie, whose mental weakness opened a crack in which cultural subversion could seep in and fester. You know, they failed very early on to defend against this, but remember guys, we won World War II. Fast forward to now, and multiple generations of people have been moulded and indoctrinated with these various ideas and ways of thinking from birth, through schools, universities, sophisticated propaganda, mainstream media, Hollywood movies, and intergenerational social pressure, to the point where this cultural, Marxist, liberal world order is the dominant order of our time, though we are seeing signs of stagnation and decay. And as the decades have passed, this has influenced the gaming industry at every level, from the shareholders and the CEOs to the managers and even the developers, which translates into the narratives, the gameplay, the characters, the story, the dialogue, the world building, and even the level design. This spans all the way down to the average gamers who consume this medium and keep this industry in business, including you and I. All of these degenerate, anti-Western, woke agendas that are permeating through gaming are the end products of these kinds of Marxist-inspired cultural subversions I've mentioned. All this woke mental rot that previous generations either knowingly or unknowingly embraced. Collectively, it is destroying gaming and Western civilization as a whole. But is there a true mastermind behind this anti-white poison who somehow are never mentioned? It's always the Marxists, the progressives, the globalists, the aliens, the reptilians. I'm genuinely baffled by this. Does anyone know? Now, do I really need to provide examples as to why and how games have turned into a subverted, goy-slop, brainwashing, humiliation ritual? Do I really have to explain why this is being forced onto gamers, a demographic of which 75% happen to be white males in the United States, and is likely higher throughout Europe? I mean, what a coincidence that the same demographic these Marxists and liberal traitors believe are the sole oppressors of all mankind are having their institutions and their culture subverted and eradicated in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sure if you're still watching this video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Video games are a relevant aspect of modern Western culture which needs to be subverted in accordance to Marxist theory. Check out the infamous Yuri Bezmenov video, the Soviet defector to the United States. It's important to point out that many people who work within the industry are none the wiser to what they are really contributing to. They are simply going through the motions in accordance with the moral framework and overall worldview that has been provided for them throughout their lives. These kinds of people have been referred to previously in history during the Cold War as useful idiots, people who may not have been overtly communists or revolutionaries, but were very susceptible to propaganda and are ideologically malleable, shall we say, which makes them valuable assets to those looking to manipulate them. And it is also important to point out that, on the other hand, there exists committed radical left-wing activists and revolutionaries within the industry and throughout society who absolutely do know what they're doing and act as a vanguard with the goal of subverting our culture, subverting Western civilization, and eventually bringing about a Marxist communist revolution. And all this brings me on to the topic of Sweet Baby Inc., who have become quite well known in recent years, a consultation group that game developers work with to gain advice on how to make sure their games are compliant with these environmental, social and governance ESG guidelines, in order for their games to obtain a high ESG score so that the global investment management company Vanguard deems them eligible for large ESG fund investment. Vanguard is literally paying companies to inject these progressive, woke, degenerate social agendas into their games in exchange for money. Again, I'm sure if you're watching this, there's a good chance that you already know what this is about. Sweet Baby Inc. is made up of a number of these committed radical activists who tell these game devs how to include DEI to their games. Scum of the earth commies, essentially. Radical left activists who are poisoning these games with the most obvious Marxist, social, political, woke brain rot that we have all become so used to seeing at this point. Video games are supposed to be regarded as art. They used to mean something and provide unique experiences exclusive to that medium. But in what feels like most cases now, they are no more than disgusting slop, humiliation rituals designed for the brainwashing and demoralizing of the Western male psyche. They exist to brainwash those who are susceptible to it and to demoralize those who are aware of it and resistant to it. And yes, that is genuinely what these games are, regardless of whether these ESG, DEI riddled abominations of video games are a commercial flop, which a lot are. These companies and their parent companies are literally compensated by these Vanguard ESG funds with some extra cream on top so that they can bear the economic brunt of their games, possibly taking a complete nosedive commercially. The art form we all love and have grown up enjoying has been turned into nothing more than a tool of cultural and psychological subversion by the enemies of our civilization. And there are still so-called gamers out there who gobble up the slop and hand over their shekels without a care in the world, a modern manifestation of useful idiots. And it always brings me back to the question of why these things have been allowed to happen to this industry. Well, we know why. It's just one aspect of a larger overall effort to tear down the very fabric of our way of life, with the goal of reducing white Western nations down to a state of complete civilizational oblivion, to make way for the communist utopia these dysgenic freaks spend all day gooning themselves over. I, and I'm sure many others, believe that the great gaming industry crash is inevitable and necessary. A large correction is surely due. This ship's course cannot be corrected. We can only hope that in the burning ashes of this once great medium, an ember remains of what it was and still could be, that could be brought back and revived into something which can reach even greater heights. Until then, I guess we're all doomed to remain in this technologically advanced but spiritually, socially and morally infected, degenerated husk of a civilization that's been dragged away from its true potential under the false guise of acceptance, tolerance, diversity and inclusion of ideologies which, when embraced, can only lead to a healthy society's ultimate demise. And it's funny, by the end of this year, 2025, I think Dying Light the Beast is probably the only new game I will have actually properly enjoyed, which works out as the single game a year the undesirables like myself and probably yourself are allowed to have. But even in Dying Light, the DEI slop elements are still there in a subtle way. In the era of modern gaming, there really is no true escape from the overreaching tentacles of these liberal ideologies, which will be imposed on you regardless of whether you like it or not. which for now, at least of the making of this video in late 2025, still dominate the established corporate and government institutions that rule over this postmodern, technologically advanced, yet spiritually and morally starved period in history. But tides are turning, or at least the current global regime is allowing certain concessions and making the bare minimum amount of necessary sacrifices to quell the rising tides of mass discontentment towards the poison pushed throughout society, entertainment and media, and the treasonous, destructive policies our governments are taking against the will of the people it exists to protect. The global regime is going to try and do just enough to quell these growing right-wing and populist movements that we're seeing throughout the West. Any possible reassertions of the collective white European will within its established continents across the world are going to face enormous efforts of containment and misdirection from its enemies. And I think, in a world full of black pills, sheer black pills everywhere, you should try and channel this demoralization-induced numbness that is intentionally created to control you into sheer resilience, into training, into taking the necessary steps to make yourself more knowledgeable, more formidable, physically and intellectually. Don't just let our enemies win. Embrace these challenges on a core level and understand that to be born in this time is an opportunity to be part of a great Western revival and to even contribute to its actualization. Now, don't get me wrong, I know. Nothing ever happens, and we are all incel, straight white gamer chuds. Literally, the most oppressed group in society, and there is no comparison. This is something to be embraced and integrated into a larger identity, not forgotten. How could you forget the horrendous conditions which were brought about on us? There is an attack being carried out on all fronts. Attacks on our games, on our culture, and on our very civilization. And the overall lack of games that are made for people like me only seems to increase. And although I do replay the classics and games I grew up loving, everything now is made for the modern audience, which almost instantly excludes games like me and probably yourself. So much for tolerance and inclusion of everyone, eh? Everyone except the evil, oppressive, straight white males who even now are still the majority of gamers. And that's the whole point of this, is to make us the minority within gaming, and in the bigger picture, a minority throughout the West. But I do believe things can be turned around, or at least brought back after some type of extinction event, like when all these childless, neo-Marxist freaks eventually die out and the vindicated chud gamers are the ones still standing. If that wasn't the case, and there was no chance of revival, then we wouldn't be facing these levels of propaganda, or the humiliation rituals, or the anti-white demoralization that we currently endure. But in the short term, we are probably actually going to see some improvements in general quality in both gaming and other media, as the corporations that own these industries start to put the brakes on the sheer amount of such overt social, political, Marxist, extreme left propaganda in its products, as people continue to reject it on such a massive scale. But this does not mean the war is over by any means, it's just beginning. Maybe a revival of gaming could theoretically coincide with, or be a byproduct of, a revival of our whole civilization as we break the chains of this multi-decade long cultural, Marxist, ideological and psychological subversion which elevates weakness over strength, falsities over facts, ideology over biology. It elevates the unnatural over the natural, feelings over logic, the minority over the majority, and degeneracy over purity. It elevates self-hate over embracing what you are and what you could be moving forward. I've been thinking that there are two wolves of the Western male gamer's psyche. One is the legitimately persecuted, it's over Chud, who recognises the current reality and is a logical byproduct of the conditions which created it, a necessary element to integrate. And there's the other wolf, the wolf of overcoming, of we're back, of spirit, of discipline and self-actualization, who recognises that the future lies in those who are determined to mould it, those who refuse to be victims and won't allow themselves to be ground down by the evil forces, who recognise that our great forefathers also faced immense challenges of their times and rose to the occasion, which produced the greatest civilisations the world has ever seen. The reason we love video games is because deep down in our genetic code we are the hero, the adventurers, explorers, warriors, conquerors, pioneers, scholars and innovators. The history and accomplishments of Western man are unparalleled. We have the Faustian spirit embedded in our DNA, ingrained into it by nature over thousands of years of struggle and natural selection. Our enemies understand this about us. This is why gaming had to be destroyed, because it is the last bastion of escapism where Western man gets to live out his most core, primal impulses in a world where these healthy inclinations have been demonized to the point of paralysis. But their methods are becoming stale and predictable. They have become too confident and arrogant, exposing their true intentions. Things have now been set in motion which in time proves to define eras. They really should have just left the straight white gamer chuds alone.